Thank you, Superintendent, Directors. So I am Tom Redke, I am the Budget Director, and I am here to talk about the pro forma. And I'll start with what the pro forma is and why, and I think the Superintendent really teed this up well for us. The pro forma is a status quo projection of the district's finances. All right, so it's a model of what the district might expect financially in the future if it continues operating as it has over the last 5 years. We do the pro forma every year as a tool for the board and senior leadership to help them make financial decisions. And it's really an explanation of why the district's financial position is what it is, and analysis of what it could be in the future. What it is not, just to be clear, it is not a prescription for structural changes. It's not a proposal of remedies or an attempt to direct the board and senior leaders. So in summary, we're not seeing a whole lot of changes from prior year pro formas. We've been seeing similar results for several years, and it really anticipates some upcoming financial challenges. We have the revenue cliff coming in fiscal year 25 due to the loss of the COVID-19 funding, the ESSER, and we have a slow decline in revenue due to declining enrollment between fiscal years 26 and 29. We also expect expenditures, they will continue to rise and then kind of even out as enrollment drops. But we do have inflation baked in here, and that will cause the expenditures to go up. And we also are projecting that we would have to, as we are now, continuing to subsidize the food service fund. Just a note about this projection, it does include the revenue from the legislature that was passed in the last session. So that's in here, and the intervention teams are also included in these projections. All right, enrollment wise, we continue to expect annual declines in enrollment. We anticipate enrollment declines to slow over the next 5 years. And enrollment declines are driven primarily by a decline in the number of school-age children that are living in the district. All right. Recent enrollment declines are not driven by charter schools or open enrollment. And if you look at that graph, which charts out enrollment in various forms of public education since 2000, the red field at the top is charter schools. The kind of mustard in the middle is open enrollment or enrollment options, and the bottom, the blue, is MPS. And you'll notice that while the overall number of students is going down in the city, the width of the red and the yellow bars have remained fairly constant for several years. And when we look at the data, what we are seeing is that the number of children in the city has declined. We're looking at American Community Survey data here. In 2019, there were over 55,000 children aged 9 and under living in the city of Minneapolis. And if you look at that chart, you'll see we have the red and the blue. The blue is kids under 5 years old, right? That's our kindergarten pipeline for the next 5 years. And then the red bars are the kids ages 5 to 9. So those are kids that we would have in our system and that we would expect to continue over the next 5 years. In 2022, there were just under 43,000 children aged 9 and under living in the district. So that's 12,000 kids that we saw drop out in the numbers. And there's 5,200 fewer kids of that elementary school age, 7,000 fewer kids in that under 5 group. So what we're seeing is there's fewer children living in this city for us to educate. And we anticipate that enrollment will decline kind of to a new normal, and kind of kindergarten is a leading indicator of enrollment changes. Declines in the kindergarten cohort indicate a fundamental demographic change, right? So we've seen the kindergarten cohort reduced from about 3,000 kids a year to about 2,000 kids a year. In the pro forma, we're assuming that this wave of outward migration from the district has largely occurred. and that the size of the entering kindergarten classes has stabilized. And so we're looking for enrollment to stabilize somewhere between 23 and 24,000 towards the end of this decade. And kind of further evidence that it's children leaving the city as opposed to leaving for a competitor. You see this slide, I have, there's a circle, that's the pie. And imagine that this pie is all the kids who have left Minneapolis over the 5-year period. It's 6,961 kids that are reported as residents. All right, because MDE counts the number of children that are reported as residents. If you go to a charter school or another district, that district will report you as a Minneapolis resident. All right, so the yellow slice, 529, those are our open enrollment kids. So that was their gain during that period. The green slice is 602 kids. That was the increase at the charter schools during that period. And then the red slice, 5,830 children are just simply not here anymore. All right, revenue-wise, oh, and one more thing on enrollment I'll just mention is that, this is not a problem that's isolated to Minneapolis. Other large school districts around the country are seeing this exact same phenomenon. I just had a chance last week to meet with several finance leaders from other large districts, and they're all seeing the same thing. All right, so revenue-wise, we anticipate that our property tax levy and our general education aid from the state will continue to decline as enrollment drops, right? So we'll see increases in the formula every year of between 1.5% and 2.5%, but as enrollment declines, that will offset those formula increases. And then with the expiration of ESSER 3, at the end of the current year, we expect to see a massive drop in federal funds in fiscal year 25, also known as the cliff. And when we look at our revenue compared to other districts, so there's 5 large districts in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Osseo, Rosemount, and Anoka. If we compare the per student revenue for the 5 largest districts, Minneapolis and St. Paul are at the top, right? They're very high at around $21,000 of revenue per student, and this is general fund. It's like 33% more than these other districts, Osseo, Rosemount, and Anoka, that each have about $15,000 in revenue per student. And there's a couple places this shows up, right? So the property tax levy, we have a good referendum here. The green, the general ed aid, is significantly higher, and that's largely due to compensatory revenue. All right, so our expenditure projection. We kind of talked about this, it goes up a little bit and then down. Our assumptions for expenses, we assume 2.5% increases in the cost of labor, 3% inflation on everything else, and that we would continue to have a 5% vacancy rate across all positions. So at any given time, we would expect 5% of positions to be vacant. And then, of course, the expenditures will decline kind of in the out years as with fewer students, you need fewer teachers. And again, we can compare our expenditures on a per student basis to other districts. So MDE breaks out expenditures into these 3 buckets. There's a link at the bottom of this slide for anybody who'd go to like to go run this data for any district you want in the state. And it's school level uses of funds, student transportation, and district level administration. All right, so we lead, I guess, in school level and transportation expenditures. We're spending more at the school level per student than other districts are. That said, that makes up a smaller percentage of our overall budget. So we're spending 88.2% of our budget at the school level versus 91 or 92% like you would see in an Osseo or an Okehennepin. And if we look at that 88.2%, it's 80.1% instruction and support services, 8.1% facilities and maintenance. And then we spend 6.1% of our budget on student transportation, and just under 6% on district level administration. So not the highest, but not the lowest. All right, and so when we zero in on our fund balance, and fund balance is kind of our it's what we look to. The board, you have a policy that we have an unassigned fund balance of 8% or more. And the fund balance that you see here of 155 million, about a third of that is the unassigned piece. The other pieces are spoken for, if you will. The way to read this chart is you have blue bars, that's your fund balance over time. And between those blue bars, you can see how it changes, right? So the green bars are inflows, and so they go up. And the red bars are outflows, so they go down. And then you get to your new blue bar, which is your new fund balance. You'll notice there's a slim little red bar in every year, and that is your food service subsidy. All right, and so it does show us going negative in the fund balance in fiscal year 26. And at that point, we would enter statutory operating debt. So we would essentially run out of cash and be unable to operate. Fund balance, we like to keep a fund balance on hand that's unassigned because it really is kind of our source of liquidity in case of something like a government shutdown when revenue stops coming from the state. Additionally, we never really know the timing of property tax payments that are going to come in. So just having that fund available to make sure that we can always make the next payroll and pay our bills, it's important. So when we stand back and we try to diagnose these financial issues, as we develop the fiscal year 25 budget, we're going to have to deal with three kind of core challenges. There's the use of the ESSER 3 funds for continuity of services over the last 2 years. That's going to force the district to decide what services it prioritizes. The amount of physical space in the district is excessive given the district's needs. And then with all those buildings, we have a redundant deployment of staff throughout the district. And so just to comment on those ESSER 3 funds, one thing that using those ESSER 3 funds to fund ongoing operations, continuity of services, has allowed us to do is to increase our fund balance overall. So this is fiscal years 21 and 22. We continue to see the pattern in 23, which is in the process of being closed now. But in fiscal years 21 and 22, we increased our fund balance by $37.8 million. And during that same period, the district expended $77.8 million in ESSER funds, and this was mostly to pay for continuity of services. So the difference between those numbers, $40 million, is the deficit that was averted thanks to ESSER. Essentially, if we had not received those ESSER funds, instead of increasing our fund balance by $37.8 million, we would have decreased our fund balance by $40 million. During this period, the district also ran with a vacancy rate in excess of 10%, pretty commonly. Now I want to talk a little bit about our the space and all the real estate that we own. Minneapolis has nearly 8.5 million square feet of building space, and this is by far the most of any district in the state. The next largest district in the state is St. Paul in terms of square footage, and they have over 1 million square feet less than us. So this is all space that you have to heat, you have to clean it, And what it really means is that we can accommodate many more students than we have, given the amount of real estate that we have. And we try to think about our physical capacity, and we can look at square footage per ADM. We have 291 square feet of space in our buildings for every ADM that we report. Other large districts have just under 193, so 192.8. So it's a significant difference. And in fact, if we take that our fiscal year 22 membership and we kind of adjust it to see where it would be at 193 square feet per ADM, we would actually have room for just under 44,000 students, just under 15,000 more kids. So the district right now is operating approximately at 2/3 of its capacity. And what having all that space leads to is staffing levels where we have lower student-to-teacher ratios in other districts. And this is largely because of spreading all those services across the district. So this is PELSB data from fiscal year 22, where for general instructional licensed teachers, we had 17.3 kids per teacher versus like a Rosemount that had 21.2. So that's actually a pretty significant difference. And we see the same pattern with support staff, right? So we need more counselors, social workers, nurses, and non-instructional licensed staff to serve the same amount of children that other districts serve. And there are legitimate reasons why Minneapolis may need more student support staff than other districts, but it still does come with a cost. Now, that said, after all I've said, we do have to also think about the really long view for the district, right? Minneapolis is a resident school district. We have to absorb any increased demand that may arise due to market changes, demographic shifts, whatever. If a kid is living here, we have to take them. And we've experienced sudden increases in enrollment before, right? So there's that initial massive increase driven by industry, European immigration, mandatory school, free textbooks, things like that. And then in the 50s, we see the baby boom, we have the millennials in the 90s. These all led to sudden increases in demand for public schools. Another thing we have to keep in mind is that Minneapolis is often spoken about as one of the US cities least likely to be negatively impacted by climate change. So we're going to experience negative impacts from climate change, but as the globe heats up, we may see people moving north simply for the better weather. And we have to stand ready to take any kids that come. So this year, as part of our budgeting process, we are trying to put together this strategic operating plan. And the strategic operating plan is really a financial expression of the strategic plan, right? So take the strategic plan and kind of, what does that mean in terms of dollars and cents? We want to do a 5-year plan, where the first year would be our fiscal year 25 budget, right? That would ground it. And then the 5th year really is looking at what your kind of transformative vision through your transformation process looks like and what that plan is. And then years 2 through 4 is where we really have to do the work to connect years 1 and years 5, right? So how do you transition from what the budget is next year to where you envision the board, you envision the district going? And so the steps that we would take to do this and plan to take to do this is once you've defined kind of the end state or what the district looks like in year 5, we would take that, we would create our operating budget for the first year, which is next year. And then we would make a plan that moves the district from year 1 to year 5. And once we do that, we can really take a look at our capital assets, identify what can be used, where we have gaps and may need to actually do improvements, and where we might have unneeded resources that need to be disposed of. And we create an aligned capital project. And then it's really important that when you do something like this, you do it every year, right? So it's not a one and done. You always want to be continuously planning. All right, so in conclusion, the current cost structure of the district is unsustainable. We've been saying that for a while, and we'll just reiterate that. Demographic changes in the district mean that financial issues cannot be resolved through expanded revenue, right? We just do not believe that that is possible. There are fewer children living in the city than there were 5 years ago. That's a fact. And enrollment losses to charter schools and other districts have slowed to minimal levels. So we are not losing kids to charters. We're not losing kids, you know, a little, but we're not losing kids to open enrollment. We're primarily losing kids to other places to live. Action is needed to preserve district solvency. And then any plan should contemplate long-term impacts while prioritizing the students that are currently enrolled. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Tom, before we do that, I just want to make sure that I shoot over to Senior Officer Giap in case he has any comments before we start with questions.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Cox. Thank you, board members, and the public that is watching, present here today or from home. Tom, thank you for the work of the department on this pro forma. I wanted to make sure that we understand. Tom talked about what a pro forma is, but there is something that I think I need to reiterate, because what we're saying here is that if we do nothing, and that is the big assumption, if we do nothing, I don't think that that's an option open to us. So we would do something. So we're saying that if we do nothing, this would happen. And what is this? This is a rate of expenditure that is higher than the rate of revenue. Is this specific to Minneapolis? Absolutely not. And I think that we need to be, we should be commended for coming up with a document like this year in, year out for the past 7 years. What are we saying? We're saying that we're open, we're transparent with the public. Here is where Minneapolis is. Any other district in the state can do this. Any other state in the country can do this. We are doing it. And so that is showing that we are open with what we're saying, what we're doing. And when it comes to the assumptions, there is a slide here that talked about the 2.5% in labor cost increase and 3% in inflation. Just today, the figure came from the Federal Reserve that inflation is down at 3.2. The stock market has gone up today because of the 3.2. Originally, it was scheduled to be down at this time to 3.3. So we're doing better. So that means that the 3% that is there was not something that we pulled from a hat to put there. We made sure that we use numbers that are responsible. And every slide that you see, if we mention any number, we also disclose the source. So if anybody has a doubt, you can go and find those in those sources. And we stay open to respond and answer any questions that anybody has. And we provide opportunities throughout the year to respond to questions. But after the pro forma is done, we get into serious work, the serious work of working the budget of the school district. This is not a small enterprise. It's a huge, huge enterprise. That's a complicated piece that we all are responsible for, and we'll be working to making sure that we present a balanced budget to you all. But I want the public to understand that we're here saying that this is what would happen if we do nothing, and we stand ready to do something to making sure that we avoid this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Interim Superintendent Cox, and to Senior Officer Giap and Director Tom for all of your work on presenting us with this pro forma so that we as a board can better understand the actions that need to be taken forth, to Director Opti too and the finance team, finance committee for all of their work to and asking the right questions to bring this forward. Directors, at this time, if you have any questions, please hit your request to speak button, and we'll try to go through them quickly on the budget pro forma. Looks like our student representative, Halima.
So my question is very basic. Also, before that, thank you again for making this presentation. I think this is numbers that everyone can benefit from seeing. And do you mind pulling up that slide again so I can like raise my question? Okay, my question is, you guys are saying that a change needs to happen, and so what I feel like with that question, knowing that you guys know that change needs to happen, I was wondering, did your department come up with any like what does your department think that what change needs to happen?
So I would say that we're not in the business of prescribing change. The board is going through a transformation process right now. I think that from our perspective as a department, the district is sized for a number of kids who are that we don't have anymore, and so that would have to be addressed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Emmerich?
Thank you. This is a great presentation as usual, and so first of all, thank you to you, Senior Officer Giap, your whole team for that. And Senior Officer Giap, you explained it perfectly, right? How I have been saying it is, if it's March and I'm planning to take my family on vacation in July, but I'm looking at my year's worth of finances and I realize, because I know what my monthly expenses are and I know what my one-off expenses are going to be, and I realize that if I take my family on that vacation in July, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent come November and December, right? So I decide to cancel that vacation while I can still get my refund, okay? We're cutting my vacation budget, and then in November and December I can pay my rent. It doesn't mean my projections were wrong, or that was magically money that came out of nowhere. It means that I had the skill and the ability and the forethought to see what was going to unfold in my finances for the year, and I course corrected so that I would be able to cover my most necessary expenses. And so I thank you and your team for making sure that we are doing that as a district. It's incredibly responsible and incredibly skilled at it. So having said that, I do have just a couple of questions about the presentation. Going back to slide 5, you said the intervention triads were represented in our expenses. Is that across the entire grid there?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, this was mostly answered on a later slide, but when I look at 6, 7, and 8, so we see some data presented in some different ways there. I believe everything that you're saying in this presentation to the best of your ability, because I really trust y'all's team. But we, as you later touched on slide 21, have seen enrollment dips and increases, and we don't always know exactly what's going to contribute to that. So, we saw in 2005 to 2010, looking at slide 6, this dip, and then we saw an increase from 2011 to 2017, and then we start to see this dip again, and we see that with the kindergarten enrollment, sort of that metric as well. So how do we know that over the coming 5 to 10 years, we're not gonna see that another upswing in enrollment, just because that happens sometimes?
I would not say that we know that at all, right? So we don't know what migration patterns in the United States are going to look like in 5 years, right? So we can only work with the data that we have and with the trends that we're in, and this is what we're seeing. I definitely would not want to do a plan where I planned on a cohort of unidentified students coming in 3 years from now. So it might happen, and that would be great, but I don't think it would be responsible to plan around it.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Thank you for that. Looking at slide 11, let me get there on my This was something that I didn't hear you touch on when you were talking about this information. Why, what is the significant difference in those federal revenue when you see the big red bars for Minneapolis and St. Paul, and then they're real skinny for Osseo, Rosemont, Apple Valley, and Anoka Hennepin? Can you, what do you attribute that to?
So that is, first of all, some places like Osseo, Anoka, Hennepin, Rosemount, they have lower free and reduced lunch levels than we do. So they're going to receive already fewer federal funds. And then the way the ESSER distributions were made was based on the Title I distributions. And so Minneapolis and St. Paul both got large distributions that how we've been spending to continue operations.
Thank you. I knew you'd have a good answer for me. Slide 17. I'm just going to try to shoot. I just have a couple more. I'm just going to shoot them off real fast. Sorry. Try not to speak like that anymore. I'm just going to try to ask them quickly. So this is another question comparing to other districts when we look at our total square footage. Looking at sort of like the perspective of how other districts came together, like their capital decisions over the timeline of how that district formed, why, if all districts are facing, you know, some pretty significant disenrollment challenges right now, why don't other districts have this overabundance of square footage that we have?
Sure. So I think that the enrollment declines are primarily being felt in the bigger, more urban districts, right? So suburban districts have been more stable, or as in the case of like a Rosemount, Apple Valley, they're actually increasing their enrollment year over year. We also have very old buildings. We have some of the oldest buildings in the state, and it's really, you know, the effect of 150 years of continuously building schools on an as-needed basis. You know, we build them, we use them until we don't need them anymore, but we simply have accumulated this many over, you know, how many ever years.
Okay, I got it. And then I just have one more on slide 19. And I didn't get you this in advance, so if this is a bigger question than you can answer in the moment, I totally understand. We can touch base later. I'm just thinking about our kids and about how, yes, 17.3 licensed teachers to a student is low in this, you know, in this data set. What is too low? Is that fewer teachers than we really need? When I think about, you know, some children receiving special education need a smaller ratio than that, right? You know, small group instruction, these types of things. I'm not asking you or anyone to name right now, well, what would be ideal, as much as I really want to say, I'm thinking about this as two different costs: the costs of the operation of space, and then the cost of staff. And I know that they're related, and when in your presentation they were related, and of course they are, but I'm wondering if there's maybe some value to separating those two costs and seeing, you know, if we were to reduce the amount of money we spend operating buildings, could we have less reduction and keep a smaller staff to student ratio? Like if that was our priority, if small staffing ratios as small as possible was our priority over keeping all the square footage, is that something we could look at as a board priority?
Yeah, I mean, so when you, in a priority-based budgeting, like we've started using, you know, if low class size is your priority that you want to pursue it over other things, right, then that's what you focus on, is trying to make it as low as possible. I will point out that this is general ed instructional licensed teachers, so it's a subset. But yeah, you know, it's you pick your priority and that's what you focus on first.
Is there a way that, and I can't, it's difficult to even sort of imagine with all the different sort of categories of learners what it might look like, but is there a way that we can get some data that's more inclusive of our staff to student ratios for, you know, like ELL, special education, to kind of see where we're at when we consider that?
Yeah, I can try to get you some stuff. Pillsbury reports they're interesting, but I'll take a look at it for you.
Okay, thank you, and I'm done.
Thank you. Director Jordan.
Thank you, Chair Elamine. Well, first off, thank you for the pro forma. the historical importance of these performers notwithstanding, I joined the board in 2017, and that was the first year that we've had them, along with Superintendent Graff was new, as well as Chief Financial Officer Dia, or special. Anyways, point being is before that, if you go back before that pro forma timeline, we basically just kind of just said this is what our budget will look like next year. This is what we're projecting for enrollment, and we never had a clear outline of where we were as a district when in terms of impact of charter schools, open enrollment, and whatnot. We never really did, and it really came to a head in the year, I think it was 2014 or 2015, when the chief financial officer, doesn't anyone remember what happened in 2015? Who else was in that room here in 2015? I was, you were, and you were. Everyone else, nobody remembers 2015? When our chief financial officer, we were projecting a deficit of -2 students, and our enrollment projection was off by 900. It blew a hole in our district budget that year because we did not have a pro forma in place. And the chief financial officer, and you remember this, Gary, stated that we did not take into effect or account the impact of charter schools in the city of Minneapolis. We lost 900 students that year and blew a hole in our budget. And it wasn't until Ed Graff and Chief Diop, more specifically, and his team came to town that we instituted pro forma. So we have these budget safeguards in place so that we can monitor and track enrollments like Mr. Rothke is explaining tonight, which is very viable in this day and age when we have migration of students for whatever reason, as you went over. So I think when we look at these budget pro formas, yes, it is a projection. And if you go back to the school district MPS finance page, you will find every single budget pro forma from 2017 when they started to today. And if you go through them, while they are not entirely 100% correct, they are pretty gosh darn close to where we're at enrollment-wise and budgetary-wise and where we are going in terms of incoming revenue from our tax base, from our referendums, to our food service fund, comp, Title I funding. All of it is there online, and our budget pro forma projections are pretty gosh darn close. Are they ever going to be 100%? No, they are never going to be 100%. But the fact of the matter is that we use this tool. We are actually, honestly, the only district in the state of Minnesota that uses a budget pro forma. Nobody else does. And that is why I think moving forward, we continue to rely on these. And it does draw attention because we've won national awards. I think 2 years in a row we've won them. And we've been recognized on the state level as well for the in-depth financial work that we do. And consistently, since I've been here, yes, we are facing massive deficits year after year after year. And I continually behoove people to please look at our finances. We have had, I think the other year we had a $95 million deficit that we plugged with a lot of ESSER funds. And we still had to make up ground, rearranging contracts, attrition, staffing needs, etc. So, I mean, we are trying as hard as we can to keep our head above water. We've been doing this since 2017. The first year I came in, we had I think it was $38 million that we had. And it would have been worse had we not had a budget pro forma in place. And it's that important that we continue to use this type of budgeting. And with our outlook, with our changing demographics, we have lost 12,000 students. And quite honestly, there's no way we're going to get them back. I mean, the birth rate is so low, right? And I can go on that, but my main point is on the budget pro forma. Thank you for doing the hard work. And I implore people to please go on the district finance page. Every single document that these men are presenting and that their staff have worked on tirelessly, you can find online. The budget pro forma is 2 clicks on the finance page. Every other individual school budget is also online. Our yearly audits that we report to the State Department of Education is also online. Everything that we have talked about and we'll be talking about when we make these hard choices when it comes to school transformation is online. All of it is completely online, completely accessible. And so again, I just want to say, I don't have any questions. I just want to say thank you for doing this hard work, because if we did not have this budget pro forma, I think it would be a very different and very more dire straight situation than what we are facing right now. But I think in the points, in your conclusion points, I believe you are correct, spot on. And I think when people, again, I'll close with this, people need to look at our finances online. please schedule a meeting with our finance team, and I seriously encourage people to take up Chief Financial Officer D up on his offer to come in and look at our finances. I really implore people to do that and become well versed in how we get our finances. And we do have our budget board book online. That, I think, is the biggest key to people. If you are not familiar with the budget, I suggest you please click on the link and go through that. It's a lot of reading, but it explains to you A to Z how we get our budget every year. And I will end with that. So thank you very much, gentlemen and staff of the Finance Department.
Thank you. Director Norville, and then we'll move on. Director Norville.
I'll be very brief. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have one question, just because it seemed kind of, I'm not saying I don't believe you, I'm just curious. It seemed like a really high number, the number of kids that we've lost in the city, like 12,000 kids in 3 years. And I'm just wondering, like, I know, like, census is what, every 10 years, so, like, where are we getting that information from? Is it coming from the city? Because it's not just MPS, right? It's citywide, right?
It's the American Community Survey, which is kind of the census's annual update, and it's based on a sample. So is it the best? Probably not. It has some bounce, but it's directional.
Yeah.
And it also, I think, when we look at where Minneapolis students are being reported as attending school, and we see the overall number of students that are reported as Minneapolis residents decline, then we know they're not somewhere else.
Right, thank you. Yeah, and that number just seems so large, and I think as a board, and as a district, what can we be doing with the city? How can we be partnering? And I'm just kind of posing this, but how are we partnering with the city to keep families here? So, but thank you so much for the presentation.
Director Api.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Tom. I just have a couple follow-up questions. For the last 2 years, we also have, new students in our systems. Where is that in the improvement? I know we talked about the kindergarten, how much the residents we're losing. And those are, the question that I have it, Lori asked it. But where is this showing in our, for this new influx we received specifically for ELL? And the second one, I also want to know if the performer, sometimes you pull out the exact increases that the legislator gave us instead of like putting all together. Percentage-wise, or we know you mentioned that this budget is included the amount of the increase we received from the, is that a breakdown somewhere?
So we do a line-by-line calculation of the different items, the way that MDE calculates them, in much the same way. We don't break out like the old legislation for the new legislation. Just like MDE, we kind of assume that it's the legislation in place at the moment, and so that's what we use. We certainly could. As to your first question, the influx of newcomers, right, and we've seen a little bit of optimism in our enrollment this year. So we don't have, them just baked into this pro forma, nor would we, I think, assume that we're going to continue to see an influx of newcomers like that, because it's such a one-off event that we would want to, we don't have a trend yet, really, to look at.
Yeah, okay. I just want to kind of follow up one little thing. For the people who, the question that Emrak asked, like the total number of schools. Yes, Minneapolis have older schools. As a financing director, I've been studying this for the last 1 year, looking for the transformation kind of eye. We have so many schools. They're older, they're beautiful, but the suburbs has bigger, newer schools. So we have to allocate more community schools, but the capacity is not full because of the city dwelling. So that's where the the ratio staff come out, all of this. So, and we are doing as a transformation, studying facility capacity and all those. That is the work of this committee, and we are working on that.
Thank you. Thank you again, Director. Seeing no one else in queue, we will move into our next item, which is an update on the anti-bias, anti-racist committee work, more commonly referred to as the ABAR.